Welcome to the Halloween Grim Reaper Reeves special. We will be looking at the latest in the budget.
Stamp duty. No changes to capital gains tax. No change to income tax. Corp tax remains the same. Reaper Reeves, what have you done?
My name is Michael Myers.
And my name's Matthew McToofy.
Welcome to Property Insight.
Ah! Right, we can.
Well, that's a bit of fun done.
Yeah, exactly. We can cut that bit out. So we promised to be sensible now. Talk about the budget. It's a bit boring, the budget, so we had to try and make it interesting. So as mentioned, there's a lot of things rumoured, essentially, that were going on around the internet and virtually every single media channel for the last, 2 or 3 months about this awful budget that was going to be happening. And I think really, and obviously just to say that this video is specifically designed around the property investment side of things. So we're going to concentrate the sort of budget talk around property investors that have either property in their own name or property in a limited company.
Yeah, it's not a complete budget review. There are plenty of elements that we're not going to go into. We're not going to talk about, the price of a pint down the pub. Unfortunately, as important as that is to us.
So mortgage, there was some talk about mortgage interest not being able to be deducted even in a limited company, but that hasn't been affected. Capital gains tax rates increasing to some crazy amounts. A lot of rumours about that. That is still remains the same. There are some changes for capital gains tax on shares and stocks and things, but again, for property investors, no change. Pension contributions no longer being tax deductible for income tax purposes. Corporation tax rates changing. So none of those things have actually happened. So obviously we are going to talk about what has happened. We'll talk a little bit about housing. Obviously there's the big sort of stamp duty change, which we'll talk about in a bit. And that's the main one. But housing, do you want to just have a chat about what you found about mortgage rates, how that may have been affected by what's happened in the budget?
Mortgage rates. So the commentary that I saw was that the budget was billed as this budget for growth by Rachel Reeves. And yet, when you look at the independent forecasting bodies who have modelled what the growth looks like, it's fairly modest at 2 point something % growth year on year through 25, 26, 27. So difficult to see where that incredible growth is really coming from. As a result of the budget, it looks as though potentially interest rate decreases that were expected in 2025 might not happen as quickly as had previously been thought. And if that's the case, then mortgage products might not become as cheap, as competitively priced as quickly as we would be hoping for those that have mortgages.
I think a lot of mortgage lenders have baked in future changes into how they borrow money between each other that would be reflective in mortgage rates. So whether or not, even if they do reduce the base rate, I'm not sure how much that'll affect mortgage interest rates anyway, certainly this side of Christmas. Not really an awful lot to discuss about stamp duty other than the fact that it's gone up. And interestingly enough, I was listening to a podcast yesterday with regard to stamp duty. And whilst most people think it's gone up 2%, actually it's not gone up 2%, it's gone up 67.7%. Because in actual fact, if you calculate that as an increase, then it's gone up a considerable amount. So 5% now on top of whatever other stamp duty. And this is obviously residential property.
Yeah.
So still won't affect people that are buying commercial property to convert to residential, of course. And also, if anyone's interested in buying portfolios through limited companies, then there's going to be various stamp duty differences there where you can purchase, when you're purchasing the shares in a company, to own the assets within it, depending on how much lending is on it. We'll only be paying SDLT on the value of the company. which again will help to reduce that stamp duty. But generally speaking, if you're buying a property a normal property, either in your own name or in a limited company, and you're going to purchase it and it's not exempt from anything, then you'll be paying 5% on top of.
Yeah, that's right. This is the surcharge that applies only to either property investors or those that are buying a second home or third home or more. It's payable when completion of the purchase takes place. So typically, or the effective date of the transfer, typically that's the completion date. So not always, but the vast majority of the time it's completion. Therefore, it's not the date of exchange of contracts. So therefore, given the immediate timing of the effective date of this change was the day after the budget. So unless you're on the phone to your solicitors, within an hour after the budget saying, right, let's exchange contracts and complete all on the same day right now, get it done. If you've exchanged contracts or if you've already committed in whatever way and agreed a purchase price to a property, you're going to be paying an additional, well, as you said, 67% effectively increase from the 3 to 5, but from 3% to 5%, a 2% increase on stamp duty for all investors, which is quite a hit. So, for example, I've been affected by this immediately. I bought a property, or rather, I should say, I was the highest bid at an auction earlier in October, due to complete in November. So when the hammer fell, I'd agreed a purchase price and factored in the deal at 3% surcharge stamp duty. I am contractually bound to buy that property under the terms of the auction. Exchange of contracts is when the hammer falls. And when I complete in November, I'm going to be paying 5%, not the 3% I was expecting to. So that's going to cost me another £3,000. I'm actually buying 3 properties at the moment. In total, this is going to cost me an additional £9,000. It's going to impact a lot of property investors in that sort of way.
So do you think this is ultimately going to have a hit here on, it's going to be factored into property deals when you're purchasing them as an investor? So do you think that will be a lower purchase price? Do you think vendors will be getting slightly lower offers on their property because in light of this? I mean, I remember when they first introduced the 3%, certainly when I was looking to purchase properties, I was thinking, okay, well, I've got to factor in this extra 3%. So I'm not going to offer as much. And I think that will be seen certainly maybe in the auction room as well as when you're purchasing property through traditional channels.
For every property investor out there, the first thing that they're going to do now is go into their spreadsheets, change their deal analyzer, stack all future deals based on the cost of a 5% surcharge for stamp duty instead of previously what was 3%. And if the numbers don't work, then they won't be buying.
Let's just go to the next one, essentially.
Yeah. And I think this is obviously very deliberate from Labour Party and Rachel Reeves. I think they know what they're doing here. Rachel Reeves has actually said in an interview with the BBC that they want to encourage the opportunities for first-time buyers and those looking to move home to give those people, those groups, greater opportunity to buy properties compared with landlords. So fine, okay, that's why you've done it. And I found an article in the BBC where she thinks 130,000 transactions, additional transactions by those groups of buyers will take place over the next 5 years as a result of this policy change. So arguably good news for those that actually want to buy a house to live in. I'm not against that necessarily.
I mean, I think in all fairness, they could have easily given more release to first-time buyers rather than actually taxing people that are investing in stuff ultimately for renters to rent, because they're the people that are going to be hit with it more than anything, and they're the ones that have seen huge rent rises in the last couple of years. I mean, the thing is, everything's gone up, right? So you can't just blame property or blame the government for rent increases, because everything's gone up. It's everything in the world's gone up. So
I think the thing that I struggle with is if Labour genuinely wanted first-time buyers and house movers to benefit from their tax policy, then why at the same time are they reverting the stamp duty thresholds back to the lower levels from 250,000 to 125,000? And first-time buyers will pay stamp duty based on the lower amount of, I think it's 300,000 instead of 425,000. So that will revert back to those lower rates as well. So actually, on the one hand, the chancellor is saying, yeah, we want first-time buyers and we want people who are actually moving homes to actually have a better chance and more opportunity. On the other hand, they're saying, when you do that, we're going to probably tax you more. Well, it doesn't really quite stack, does it?
I think they should just make your first-time purchase completely stamp duty-free irrelevant of its value, quite honestly. I think that would have been the most sensible thing, particularly as obviously it depends on what area you're in. If you're buying a property in Hull, you're paying, your value of your property is significantly less than if you live in London or the South East. So just scrap stamp duty for first-time buyers. Anyway, we're not here to talk about what we think the government should have done. We're here to talk about what's actually happened.
The point that you made, Mark, about rents, right? I think there's a real risk that rents will increase. I don't think this is a great budget for people renting. If we define the budget as being it's for working people, there's a huge amount made, right, by the Labour Party about this is a budget for working people. We'll protect working people. Working people know who you are. You go out to work every day for a living. Your pay slips, not like us because we don't really do anything, right? The pay slips that you get won't be affected. So, okay, I get that. If you say that certainly many, if not most, renters are working people, go back to the laws of economics, and we talked about this a lot on this show before. If the supply of rental properties in the private rental sector drops, as it has done significantly in the last 5 years, then laws of economics of supply and demand will dictate that with less supply, prices go up. If landlords are not buying as much property, and according to Rachel Reeves, there'll be 130,000 less, that's the flip side of that statistic, I assume, there'll be 130,000 less properties available in the private rental sector over the next 5 years if first-time buyers and people are actually moving home are taking that 130,000. Well, then there's less supply. That will put pressure on rent increases.
What about all the properties that they're going to build, apparently?
I don't think there was enough in the budget at all, from what I could see. I didn't see much, if anything, about how are we actually going to make sure that we deliver on the promise of 1.5 million houses being built in the next 5 years?
There's a lot of spending going on, a lot of borrowing, a lot of spending. We're going to put some links in the show notes below, which will link to a few of the articles that we've found interesting through the research that we've done.
Yeah, there's been some interesting comments from, well, we've got some comments here which we can put in the show notes, basically summarising the points that we've just made. To talk about tax a little bit, I know sometimes people start falling asleep when you start talking about tax.
I love talking about tax.
I like talking about tax as well. So inheritance tax got quite a bit of a mention in relation to pensions. This will be quite interesting for property investors that use SAS, because I think this remains to be seen. There's a lot of property investors that will be watching this show who have a SAS pension, who believe that a SAS pension was a really good idea for them because it shields and shelters your pot from inheritance tax. Actually, all pensions are outside the scope of inheritance tax. A lot is made of SAS pensions as being outside the scope of inheritance tax, and property investors use SAS pensions very effectively to invest in property, whether residential or typically commercial. One of the interesting things that has been announced in the budget from Rachel Reeves is that from 2027, the unspent, I suppose, remaining pension pot after death is going to be included in your estate for the purposes of calculating your estate for inheritance tax purposes. Well, during my adult life and my time as a property investor and an accountant, I don't think that's ever been the case. So I feel like this is quite a big change.
I mean, if you've been squirreling away money into a pension pot because you thought it was going to protect yourself against, having to pay tax on that for when you pass it down to your family and loved ones, then it is a bit of a kick in the goolies, isn't it, to say the least?
Yeah. Good Ghoulies reference. I like Halloween on theme.
Halloween reference yet again, yeah.
The rules at the moment are that if you die before the age of 75, then the beneficiaries of your pension won't pay any income tax or inheritance tax on what they receive. If you die after the age of 75 and you've been drawing your pension, whatever's left that's received by the beneficiaries of your estate, they will pay income tax at their marginal rate of income tax on the value of the pension pot that's remaining. Not inheritance tax, but they will pay income tax at their marginal rate if you die after the age of 75. Now, what remains to be seen at the moment is how that rule will be working in parallel with this new inheritance tax approach. Will it be working in parallel, or will it be ditched completely and inheritance tax is the new thing to be looking at? Will it be all of the pension pot that is subject to inheritance tax, or only half of it? I think all those things are yet to be fully determined.
I think there'll be a lot of phone calls to people's accountants, won't there, around that issue. Let's just talk about employers' national insurance. So this is a big one. It's going to be raising quite a lot of money for the coffers. It's a move from 13.8% on salaries up to 15%, but more importantly, the allowance is being reduced from 5 to 10,500, which probably will affect quite a lot of property investors that have a limited company where they employ themselves. So do you want to just perhaps have a little summary of how that might affect, let's say, owner-managed businesses that might have a spouse that they have in their limited company? And
the employment allowance increasing from 5,000 to 10,500. Yeah, it's a peculiar one when I first saw that. So on the one hand, employers' national insurance bill will increase for every company. Chancellors said that will raise 25 billion a year. So that seems to be the biggest part of the tax grab of the 40 odd billion that the Chancellor's looking to raise. Specifically in relation to property investors that have a limited company where you might have a husband and wife as being the only employees, the only directors, that's the situation for me. Limited company, the only two employees are the two directors. Well, what the employment allowance does is it means basically it's almost like a tax-free threshold, really. So if your employer NI bill previously was anything up to £5,000, so you pay your salaries and you calculate your employer NI, and if it comes to 5k or less, then as long as certain criteria are met, then actually you don't have an employer's NI bill. That number, instead of 5,000, is 10,500. So you might even be paying no employer's NI if you have 3 employees or even 4.
Is that 10,500 limit in total or per
It's
employee?
in total for the employer, yeah. I heard Rachel Reeves comment on this in her interview, post-budget interview. The purpose behind that increase was to say, okay, we recognise that on the one hand, we are clearly billing, charging much more tax for employers and to businesses. And at the same time, we don't want to hurt small businesses too much by this. So what we've done is we've put the extra 1.2% across all businesses, but for small businesses, we've given you a bit extra tax-free. So there's at least something there for the smaller businesses that perhaps they think are actually working people.
Yeah, well, I guess it's the kind of tradespeople that, your gas and electric engineers and, your carpenters and all those kind of people that essentially work for themselves, but they've protected themselves within a limited company. They might employ 1 or 2 other people. I think that's the people that she's trying to protect there to a point.
Yeah.
I think that just about wraps things up here. I mean, I think unless you've got anything more to add on this.
For me, the big standout was, I think, probably 2 things. There was so much talk that I saw on Facebook threads around, what if the government does this, what if the government does that, pension contributions, cap benefits to no more than 30% instead of higher rate, the mortgage interest not going to be allowed anymore as deductible expense against rental income in the limited company, they're going to do that just like they did in Section 24, all this stuff. Actually, how much time and effort and energy did people invest in all of that conjecture? Turned out to be a complete waste of everyone's time because none of it happened. I think there's a lesson to be learnt there for a lot of us, probably including me to some extent. But the main thing really is the stamp duty.
I mean, people were actually acting on speculative suggestions about what was going to go on. I mean, acting as in, putting properties on the market and selling them because they thought that the CGT was going to be going up. I mean, I don't know how many. It'd be interesting to see what the receipts were for capital gains tax in the last 2-3 months with HMRC, based on the fact that people were selling stuff because they thought that it was going to go up. So yeah, and the same thing happened with EPCs, right? Don't get me started. But the thing is, the point over that was, let's just wait and see what happens. Let's wait and see what they decide and then act and do what you need to do. Obviously, we can't do anything about stamp duty. I think it was a reasonably clever move by Reaper Reeves to essentially do it the day to increase the transactions from the day after. Sorry, put the stamp duty up the day after, purely because the last time that was put up and there was a deadline, it was absolutely mayhem, wasn't it? The solicitors and conveyancing companies and people were just... It just completely skewed the figures and was a bit of a disaster for many people within the industry trying to get stuff done by certain deadlines. So I think actually she probably did the right thing, if I'm brutally honest. But anyway, thanks very much again for watching the channel. We do hope that you found it insightful, maybe a little bit scary at the beginning. So please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and please comment below, and we will obviously try to respond to you. And we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Just another quick reminder about our Property Insight meeting on the second Thursday of the month, if you are local to Cambridge. But we look forward to seeing you on the next one.